What if I told you that what destroys you the most is what brings you closer to God? The vices you call sin may actually be the secret codes to your spiritual calling. Carl Jung discovered that the divine does not speak through perfection, it speaks through the shadow, and that is why the chosen ones are always the most tormented. While the world seeks purity, God speaks to the broken, because only those who have fallen know the way back. If this bothers you, sign up now, because no one here will spare you the truth. You will discover that the 6 vices that haunt you are not weaknesses, they are compasses. These are signs that the self is trying to break through the mask of the ego and lead you back to what is real. God does not punish the chosen ones, He corrects them by fire. And every vice is a flame lit in the dark, pointing the way home. But be careful. Those who don't understand the purpose of these flames, he ends up burned by them. Have you ever noticed that what destroys you most is also what calls to you most? Carl Jung said that the shadow is not the enemy, it's the self trying to wake you up by force. And that's why many run away from their own addictions without realizing they're running away from God's message disguised as temptation. Addiction isn't just a weakness, it's an inverted prayer, a desperate attempt by the soul to feel something real amidst the numbness of ordinary life. When you seek pleasure, power, or oblivion, what you're really seeking is the touch of spirituality, a reminder of the calling you've been ignoring. Addiction is the unconscious's cry for presence. It doesn't want to punish you, it wants to tear you apart. Because only in the tearing apart does the self find space to be born. The soul can't bear the silence of lies, so it creates the chaos of repetition to push you inward. It's what Jung called the compulsion of destiny, that which repeats itself until you hear what needs to be heard. And while the world points the finger at you, calling weakness what is really a cry for redemption, God watches, waiting for the moment when addiction will break you enough for you to finally stop fighting your own calling. Every form of addiction is an attempt to fill the void left by spiritual silence. You drink, eat, consume, and indulge in the wrong people, not because you're bad, but because you're trying to remember something you've lost, the connection to the self. Jung asserted that true healing begins when a person bows before their own shadow and admits, "I have mastered nothing." And that's precisely where individuation begins. While you try to fix the addiction with willpower, you remain blind to what it wants to show you. The addiction doesn't want to be eliminated, it wants to be understood. It wants you to look at it without disgust, without shame, and ask, "What are you trying to teach me?" This question is the beginning of transformation. It's the point at which addiction ceases to be a prison and becomes a guide. When a person understands this, the habit dissolves naturally because its purpose has been fulfilled, the call has been heard. But most never get there. They prefer guilt to conscience. And that's why so many die clean but empty. Because eliminating the symptom without listening to the message is like putting out the fire but keeping the gas on. If you want to transform addiction into a master, stop fighting it and start talking to it. Write it down. Observe your triggers. See what triggers the impulse and what it's trying to cover up. You'll realize that behind every impulse lies an emotion that's never been heard. This is where the shadow reveals itself. And when you give it a voice, it calms. This isn't about morality, but about clarity. God doesn't want you to become pure. He wants you to become whole. And to be whole, you must embrace the part the world has told you to deny. Every time you feel the urge to repeat the same mistake, stop and listen. There's a hidden call there, a request to return to the silence where the self awaits. And when that silence is finally heard, the addiction loses its meaning, because the thirst that fueled it has found its source. But be careful. The void never completely disappears. It moves. And if you don't understand it, it will change shape and return. This is where the next movement begins. The infinite thirst of the spirit. No pleasure is enough when the soul hungers for eternity. Carl Jung said that modern man suffers from a spiritual thirst that he tries to quench with entertainment, success, and shallow affection. You felt it. That emptiness that appears even on the best of days. That feeling that no matter how right everything is, something is still wrong. This is the voice of the self, reminding you that your destiny is not to survive, but to awaken. This dissatisfaction that haunts you is not a defect, it's a reminder. The entire world was built to convince you that happiness is fulfillment, but Jung knew that fulfillment is an illusion. The soul doesn't want fulfillment. It wants movement. It needs to desire. It needs to expand. It needs to seek. It is the search that keeps it alive. That's why the more you achieve, the more you feel the echo of nothingness. Because nothing that comes from outside can fill what was born to be sought within. And the more you try to silence this thirst with the noise of the world, the louder the silence of the shadow screams within. This thirst is the first sign that you have been called. The common man is content with distractions, but the chosen one carries a discomfort that the whole world cannot cure. He seeks in travel, in love, in new projects, but always ends up at the same point. The soul still hungers. And it is precisely this hunger that separates him from the sleepers. Jung saw this restlessness as a divine code, a mechanism that prevents the spirit from dying in mediocrity. This is why those who feel too much, suffer too much, think too much, are the ones who come closest to awakening. The pain of dissatisfaction is the reminder that the path is not yet over. It is the invisible hand pushing you to the next stage of individuation. But almost no one understands this. People call anxiety what is, in fact, a memory of heaven. You are not sick. You are longing for what is eternal, and while the world prescribes tranquilizers, the self offers you awareness. You can try to deny this thirst, but it will find you. In the middle of a party, in a quiet room, in the moment between one laugh and the next, it appears. It's God reminding you that you weren't born to be satisfied, but to be awake. When this thirst visits you, don't try to drown it with distractions. Sit with it. Write down what it wants to tell you. Notice where it hurts, what's missing, what you avoid looking at. Perhaps you'll realize it's not success you seek, but meaning. And meaning can't be bought. It can be heard. Jung said the self only speaks through emptiness. It takes courage to listen, because what it says dismantles the entire ego. But whoever listens to this voice discovers that thirst wasn't the problem. It was the compass. The spirit never hungered for pleasure, but for purpose. And when this truth begins to burn, loneliness becomes inevitable, because the next step of the journey is the quietest of all. Few understand that silence is not absence, it is divine language. Carl Jung said that the soul speaks in symbols, and symbols can only be heard when the noise of the world falls silent. Silence is not a punishment for the chosen. It is the altar where the self reveals itself. When you begin to withdraw, to prefer your own thoughts to the noise of empty conversations, it is because something greater is moving within you. People will call you cold, distant, perhaps even arrogant. But what they don't know is that silence is the only place where God speaks without intermediaries. And contrary to what you've been taught, He doesn't shout, He whispers. The problem is that almost no one can stand to be quiet enough to listen. The ego fears silence because it exposes everything the ego tries to hide. It is there that the shadow appears. And those who face their own emptiness discover that silence is the cave where noise transforms into revelation. The chosen have an almost mystical relationship with solitude. It's not isolation, it's preparation. While the world rushes to distract itself, they are pulled into the desert itself. It's there that consciousness matures. It's there that the self whispers the map of individuation. Silence is the laboratory where the soul is reconfigured, where vices lose strength and the inner voice begins to become audible. When Jung said that the encounter with the unconscious is a religious act, he was talking about exactly that, the moment you stop talking to the world and begin to converse with the God within you. So don't confuse stillness with apathy. There's more movement in silence than in 1,000 words. It's in retreat that the most brutal truths are born, and none of them come without pain. Silence is an open wound where the self heals what haste has torn. That's why it hurts, that's why it saves. But silence is also a test. It separates those who pretend to seek the truth from those who are truly ready to hear it. When the noise fades, the first sound you hear is your own fear. This is where many give up. They want enlightenment, but they can't bear the darkness that comes before. True awakening begins when you realize that solitude isn't a place, it's a mirror. In it you see yourself without masks, without compliments, without distractions. And what remains is who you truly are. This is why silence is dangerous. It reveals the lie of the persona and the weight of the shadow, but it is also in this place that the soul learns to lead without needing to be seen. And when the chosen one understands the power of this emptiness, they realize they are not alone, they are being trained. Because silence is the first battlefield before facing the chaos of the world. You try to control everything because somewhere in your unconscious, you believe that if you lose control, you'll disappear. Carl Jung said that the ego is the guardian of order and the self is the master of chaos. And that's precisely why life seems to conspire against your plans. The more you try to organize the world, the more it slips through the cracks. Control is the ego's attempt to replace God, but chaos is a reminder that there's something bigger driving history, something your intellect can't foresee. When you insist on maintaining control, the universe begins to disobey you, not out of cruelty but out of love. It's trying to free you from the illusion of mastery, because only when you lose control does the self finally take over. And that's where true spirituality begins. In the collapse of certainty. It's at that moment that the soul understands that life isn't a project, it's a ritual. You think you're in control because you fear chaos, but chaos is the language of the divine. Observe the cycles of nature. The hurricane destroys to renew, the fire consumes to purify. The same happens within you. Every emotional breakdown, every unexpected loss, every disorder that seems unfair is a symbolic form of controlled destruction. The self disrupts the structure to free you from what was silently killing you. Jung called this the process of individuation, the moment when the unconscious takes the wheel and the ego screams in fear. That's why life forces you to let go. Because real spirituality isn't about holding on tight. It's about trusting when everything is falling apart. When control breaks, the calling reveals itself. And it's in this chasm between what you planned and what God wants you to experience that the miracle happens. You were never in control. You only thought you were. But there is a kind of control that is sacred. Self-control. Not the kind that represses, but the kind that observes. When you learn to master your impulses without repressing your emotions, you begin to understand the balance between virtue and surrender, between the human and the divine. The secret is to act without clinging to the outcome. Do what needs to be done, and let the universe decide the rest. This is the spiritual maturity few achieve. You don't need to erase the desire to control, just redirect it. Control your gaze, not your destiny. Control your focus, not the future. Because the self only manifests when the ego learns to serve, not to command. Life is a force field between the shadow that wants to dominate and the spirit that wants to trust, and it is in this friction that character is forged. But when you begin to accept that chaos is part of the divine order, suffering changes color. Because the next fire that will not come to destroy, it will come to polish. No spirit awakens without pain. Carl Jung said there is no enlightenment without going through the inner hell. Suffering is the flame the self uses to burn away the ego's illusions. And the more resistant you are to pain, the more it haunts you. Because pain doesn't come to punish, it comes to reveal. It's God's scalpel ripping out what no longer belongs to your essence. The common man flees suffering and remains shallow. The chosen one dives into it and emerges transformed. You only understand the depth of the soul when the ground disappears. The wound that bleeds the most is the same one that opens a passage to the sacred. Every loss is an initiation. Every mourning is a portal. And while the world sees tragedy, the spirit sees alchemy. Because suffering doesn't destroy you, it purifies you. And purification hurts because the ego dies screaming. But the death of the ego is the baptism of consciousness. It's the moment when the shadow ceases to be an enemy and becomes a teacher. Those who suffer the most are almost always those who have been called the most. There's a reason the universe seems to test you more than others. The soul that carries a greater mission needs more severe training. Suffering is the gymnasium of consciousness. Every betrayal teaches you to see masks. Every financial loss teaches you detachment. Every illness teaches you to listen to your body where the unconscious speaks. What you call bad luck is merely the curriculum of a spirit in formation. Jung said that the unconscious acts like a harsh teacher. If you don't learn through understanding, you will learn through pain. And there are no exceptions. The chosen are shaped by fire, not by luck. Therefore, instead of asking yourself, why me? Ask, for what? This shift in question is the key to individuation. It's the moment when you stop complaining about pain and start dialoguing with it. Because pain is God disguised as an adversary. But suffering shouldn't turn you into a martyr. It should transform you into a master. True spirituality isn't romanticizing pain. It's understanding what it's trying to teach. Suffering becomes useless when you idolize it, but it becomes sacred when you translate it. Take what hurt and return it as wisdom. Transform scars into instruction. Write, teach, share. When you give meaning to pain, it loses its power to enslave you. And it is at this point that you begin to understand suffering's most hidden function. It is the language of the self when words fail. Suffering is the language that awakens silence, and in silence lies healing. Therefore, the more conscious you become, the lighter the pain becomes, not because it disappears, but because it ceases to be an enemy. And when pain ceases to define you, something new is born. A silent movement begins to pulse within you. It is the beginning of sacred restlessness. There is a kind of peace that is dangerous, the kind born of complacency. Carl Jung said that the awakened person is never completely at rest because the living soul refuses to stagnate. Restlessness is the natural movement of the self within those who have heard the call. You feel it, this sense that something is waiting for you, even when everything seems to be in place. This is proof that the spirit still breathes. The asleep call it anxiety, but its real name is remembrance. It is the reminder that you were born to expand, not to repeat. Restlessness is the echo of the divine saying, "It's not over yet." And that's why you can't fit in. Stable jobs, comfortable relationships, predictable routines, none of these completely satisfy you. Because the self wants you to move. It calls you through frustration. And the more you resist, the more the emptiness grows. Restlessness is the pain of those who sense the infinite. The chosen ones mistake this restlessness for for failure. They think there's something wrong with never feeling fully satisfied, but it's the opposite. This dissatisfaction is the fuel of individuation. It's the impulse that pushes the spirit to break out of the bubble of convenience. When everything seems too comfortable, it's a sign that the soul is being suffocated. This is why crises arrive, to shake you out of stagnation. Jung said that the unconscious is a master at causing earthquakes when the soul becomes complacent. It uses dissatisfaction as an evolutionary tool. So, when discomfort visits you, don't fight it. Ask what it's trying to move. All restlessness has a direction. The agitated spirit is the boat that the divine pushes out to sea, and those who try to anchor too soon sink within. This is the irony of spirituality. The rest you seek only comes when you accept never being the same again. Learn to walk with restlessness as if it were a companion, not an enemy. It will take you places logic would never dare tread. When you feel like nothing makes sense, understand, it's the self tearing up the old map. The soul doesn't want answers, it wants depth. That's why it pushes you toward the unknown, toward the new, toward risk. This is the nature of spiritual expansion. The call isn't a gentle invitation, it's an internal pressure that forces you to grow. Restlessness is the reminder that life wants to see you awake. While others seek peace, you seek purpose. And those who seek purpose never rest, they burn. The fire of the search is the price of awareness. But this fire is sacred because it's what prevents inner death. And when you begin to trust this movement, chaos gains direction. Because just ahead, on the next step of the journey, a new gift emerges, the power to question everything. Doubting is a form of prayer. Carl Jung said that questioning is the symptom of a soul no longer content with borrowed answers. The gift of questioning everything isn't rebellion, it's spiritual maturity. It's the moment when consciousness begins to distrust inherited truths. You feel this when something inside you no longer accepts the superficial. When an old belief begins to squeeze you, it's the self trying to breathe. The ego wants certainty, but the spirit needs doubt to expand. Questioning is how the unconscious pushes you to the next level of individuation. It's the spark that breaks the spell of ready-made narratives. The questioner is the one who dares to look at the invisible and say, "This isn't all there is yet." But this courage comes at a price, because the more you awaken, the more you realize that almost everything the world calls truth is just fear disguised as morality. The gift of questioning is a lonely burden. Those who doubt everything lose the comfort of the certainties that keep the flock together. You begin to see patterns where others see coincidence. You begin to notice falseness in smiles, incoherence in speeches, manipulation in systems, and this excess of lucidity can be unbearable. But Jung said that the unconscious rewards those who persist in doubt, because doubt is the bridge between the human and the divine. It protects you from false teachers and forces you to find the God that dwells within you. With each belief that falls, a clearer vision of reality is born. Therefore, never blame yourself for doubting. The conscious skeptic is closer to spirituality than the blind believer. Because true faith is not born of obedience, but of experience. The true spiritualist doesn't believe, he perceives. And every new insight is born of the courage to ask, what if everything I was taught was just the beginning? But be careful, the gift of questioning can also become a prison. When doubt becomes an addiction, the ego steals the throne of the self. The secret is to doubt with purpose, not out of pride. Use questioning as a tool, not as a dwelling. When something seems too uncomfortable, investigate, but without getting lost in analysis. Read Jung, read Nietzsche, read yourself. Write down what you discover, observe how questions transform you. The truly wise person doesn't seek absolute answers, but new ways of seeing the same mystery. The mature questioner understands that the mind is only the lantern, the light comes from silence. Therefore, the more awareness you gain, the more you realize that questions serve not to conclude, but to expand. This is how the spirit prepares for its highest function, to carry the weight of the world with compassion and lucidity. Because this is the next stage of awakening, learning to feel collective suffering without drowning in it. There are people born with a burden the world doesn't understand. Carl Jung said that certain souls carry a portion of the collective unconscious. They feel humanity's suffering as if it were their own. They are the chosen ones, not out of privilege, but out of sensitivity. You may be one of them. You feel the pain of others, even when it's not yours. You grieve for distant injustices, for people you don't even know. This empathy isn't weakness, it's a mission. The self uses you as a channel of purification. While others sleep, you feel. While others forget, you remember. The weight that bends you is the same that consecrates you. And so, it's not uncommon for you to feel exhausted for no apparent reason. It's the price of being an antenna. The chosen one suffers not only for themselves, but for the whole. They are the bridge between the human and the divine. And the more conscious they become, the more they feel how much the world still sleeps. The biggest mistake of those who carry the weight of the world is trying to solve everything alone. The ego wants to save, but the self only sustains. You were not called to fix the planet, but to bear its consciousness. This difference changes everything. When you try to solve what is greater than yourself, the burden destroys you. But when you accept that your role is to be a presence, the weight transforms into strength. Jung said that boundless compassion becomes self-destruction. This is why the chosen ones must learn to manage their own energy, or they become martyrs instead of masters. Practice what he called love with discernment, help without drowning, feel without losing yourself. Pray but rest, serve but preserve yourself. Because even light needs shadow to exist. The chosen one doesn't save the world. They sustain it until the world learns to save itself. And this requires not heroism, but humility. Carrying the weight of the world is the final test before transmutation. When you accept the burden without victimizing yourself, something within changes its vibration. Collective pain ceases to be torture and becomes purpose. You begin to see beauty even in suffering because you understand its role in shaping the soul. Every tear you wipe, every person you listen to, every shadow you silently embrace brings you closer to the divine. Spirituality lies not in sweet words, but in the ability to endure chaos without losing love. And when the self realizes that you bear the pain of the world without hardening, it reveals the secret. The burden you carry is the same one that shapes you. It is through this that true compassion is born, the kind that no longer hurts, but simply understands. And it is at this point that the chosen one finds their own wound, because all true compassion is born from a personal pain that still pulsates, the sacred wound. Carl Jung said that what hurts you most is precisely what came to save you. Every chosen soul carries a wound that doesn't heal, not because God has forgotten, but because this pain is a reminder of who you truly are. The sacred wound is the point of contact between the human and the divine. It's the place where the ego bleeds and the self flourishes. This pain is the test of your initiation. It visits you in cycles, making you repeat stories, attract mirrors, face shadows. And no matter how much you try to heal it, it always returns, because it's not there to be healed. It's there to heal you. It's through it that you develop empathy, sensitivity, and vision. Those who have never suffered deeply lack the depth to understand the pain of others. The wound humanizes you while elevating you, and the more you run from it, the more the unconscious calls you back, because God's call sometimes comes in the form of a scar that never heals. The sacred wound is the portal to individuation. It's the point where the shadow ceases to be the enemy and becomes the guide. When you stop fighting the pain and start listening to it, something shifts within you. The energy that once destroyed you begins to transform you. It's at this point that trauma becomes a spiritual tool. Jung said that the soul heals when the unconscious is brought to light, and this light always arises from pain. So stop trying to erase what has marked you. Look directly at yourself. What broke you is what opened you. The wound is the space where God taught you to feel. And feeling is the first step to healing the world. Instead of seeking anesthesia, seek meaning. Write about your pain, paint with it, pray through it. Transform it into expression, because the gift that sleeps within your wound is the key to your mission. But there's a trap, confusing the wound with identity. Many cling to their own suffering because it gives meaning to their existence. They become devotees of their own pain. This is what Jung called possession by the complex. The wound should be honored, not idolized. It is a teacher, not a prison. When you understand this, the true miracle begins, that of transmutation. The pain remains there, but changes color. It becomes a source. The wound transforms into a channel of healing. And those who observe from the outside don't understand. How can he help others with the same suffering that destroyed him? It's simple. The self has learned to bleed with purpose, and that's what makes you dangerous to the darkness. The sacred wound is the mark of those chosen to serve, because only those who have descended into hell know the way back. And soon after accepting this wound, the journey closes, because the next step is the return to the self. At the end of every spiritual journey, what you find is not a new God, it is yourself. Carl Jung said that the self is the divine center of the psyche, the point where the human and the eternal meet. The return to the self is the moment when the soul recognizes that it was never lost, just distracted. You went through addictions, falls, loneliness, pain, and shadows, thinking you were moving away from God, when in fact you were being led to Him from within. All the suffering was just the map, all the guilt was the echo of the call. The soul needed to shatter itself to remember that it was whole. The self is not born of achievement, but of surrender. And when you finally stop trying to be enlightened and accept being real, something changes. The divine descends, the ego kneels, and consciousness realizes that separation was just a dream. The hell you feared was the womb of your own resurrection. The return to the self is not an event, it is a state. It is when the mind becomes silent and silence becomes familiar. You begin to act without seeking approval, to love without expecting anything in return, to serve without wanting control. Everything that once held you back, fear, desire, guilt, dissolves like smoke. Jung said that man only finds peace when he accepts that life is paradoxical, sacred and profane, light and shadow, chaos and meaning. The self does not eliminate contradictions, it integrates them. And this integration is the true miracle. You stop wanting to be good and start wanting to be true, and in this truth you find freedom. The return to the self is the end of the inner war. Not because the battles cease, but because the soldier reconciles with the field. Everything continues to happen, only now you are whole, and integrity is the quietest form of power. When the self awakens, life changes its texture. The pain continues, but it no longer tears you apart, it polishes you. People test you, but you respond calmly. Chaos visits you, but you already know how to dance with it. The return to the self is the rebirth of confidence. It's when you understand that everything that seemed like punishment was preparation, that every vice was a code, that every silence was instruction, that every wound was a portal, and that God was never outside, only disguised as absence. This is the moment when spirituality ceases to be theory and becomes breathing. You experience what you once only understood, and the world finally makes sense, not because it has changed, but because you have once again seen with divine eyes. And it is in this gaze that the cycle closes. Because whoever returns to the self understands, the path does not lead to God. The path is God, and now He is within you. Maybe the mistake was never to fall, but believing that falling was the end. Carl Jung said that every chosen soul must lose itself, because it is in the loss that the self reveals itself. The vices that haunt you are not punishments. They are compasses pointing to where the spirit still bleeds. And every time you try to erase the pain, you also erase the possibility of finding yourself. Have you ever noticed how what embarrasses you most is also what humanizes you most? How is what breaks you, what teaches you to love without a mask? What if the divine didn't want your purity, but your wholeness? What if redemption wasn't about getting rid of the shadow, but about embracing it until it dissolved into light? Maybe God never punished you. Maybe He just sculpted you. And every vice, every silence, every wound, it was just His way of saying, remember me. Not to dominate you, but to return you to yourself. Now it's up to you. Are you going to keep running away from what calls you? Or will you have the courage to listen to what the fire is trying to tell you? If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.